Welcome to another podcast for gospel entrepreneurs and UCB. And I'm thrilled today to have my good friend, Matt Parfitt, who is up in Nottingham. He's got a fascinating story. He used to be a teacher, went out to Africa, set up a thing called Grace Enterprises, but we're going to hear something of his story. It's great that you're with me, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always fun when we get to chat together.
Yeah, so Matt, you're a father, you're a husband, you've got kids. Just a little bit of who you are so that people know they're listening to would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, grew up in Nottingham and still here now. Been away to uni and come back, but got married to Sam 21 years ago now, and then trained to be a primary school teacher, which I was for a few years. I'm sure we'll touch on that in a moment. And then now got 3 children. Beth, who's 15, Dan, who's 13, and Zoe's about to turn 11, but she's sort of going on 15 as well, it seems. So yeah, lots of fun, lots of busyness. Been at the same church for over 20 years as well. So lots of roots now in Nottingham.
And you need a miracle. You've got 3 teenagers living in your home, Matt. I can't believe that. What's that like? That must be, and as a teacher as well.
Yeah, I mean, there was a reason why I taught primary school. That's definitely the age that I enjoy the most. But yeah, no, it's brilliant having them. They are all fantastic. Really proud of them. They're doing great, and yeah, enjoying being at church. They've been at the New Day Festival this summer, 2 of them, both really feeling like God's speaking to them. So yeah, we keep praying for them, but they're doing really well.
Yeah, I think when I was in Youth for Christ, that whole residential experience for teenagers just puts a seal on what God's doing and it's really critical in faith development for young people. So I think all these festivals or weekends, they're just amazing. But Matt,
Absolutely.
enough
Yeah.
about youth work. You went off to Africa and that kind of changed your life. You went out there thinking, we're great missionary material. My wife's a doctor. I'm a teacher. We're just going to be missionaries to Africa. Was that what you went to do?
Not far off. So yeah, this is 2006. My wife's doing medicine, so it's got a medical elective, got a few months. So we're going together at this point because I get time off school. We're more sort of testing the call. So I don't think we ever thought we will be missionaries, but definitely thought we could be at that stage. And so it was more of an exploration. Let's go somewhere. Let's see what God says, see if it does stir our hearts or not. But yeah, our hearts were stirred, but not in the way we expected. So we didn't feel like we were called to mission work. But it turns out that at the very end of that time, what we did was we went and visited a New Frontiers church up in northern Kenya, in Meru. And actually, that was the thing that's really changed our lives. So seeing a church there that was so active in society, absolutely relevant. They were building a police station, a hospital, schools, and in an area that was poor, where you'd think there'd be aid coming in to help support people, it was the opposite. They were doing famine outreach to the local area. And it was incredible. And the reason for that was because the church was running businesses that were then generating a surplus. And then they were being generous in what they were doing with that. And for me, that was the first time I'd ever seen church involved in business. And yeah, I was inspired.
And business's mission was a kind of hook, wasn't it? Which I know when you shared at the Gospel Entrepreneurs 24 Hours, that was really what you caught. And this pastor had obviously got it. So you came back to your pastor and you thought immediately he'll get this. He'll just see this and it'll be all swinging, all dancing. Business's mission.
Yeah, I mean, what seemed relatively clear to me didn't seem that clear to them at that point. And so, yeah, that was 2006. And there was an immediate, well, I'm not sure that could work over here. And I'm a teacher at this point. So it's not as if I can do anything directly myself at that point. But then, yeah, felt like God nudging me and then getting really frustrated. There were no employers, a really well-intentioned church that was newish, but actually full of middle-class people like me, teachers, doctors, lawyers, who want to help, but actually no employers. And so getting frustrated with God about that. This is May 2007 now. I was at a social action conference, felt like God said, right, well, you do it then. So that's what I did. Effectively on Monday morning, I handed in my notice. And after the head teachers, after I've convinced him that I'm not leaving to go to another school, because there aren't many men that teach year 1, he was saying, well, what are you going to do then? Which was a fair question because I'm mid-20s at this point. And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to be an employer. And to employ people with major barriers to work, people who've been in prison, been homeless, struggle with addiction, people who've got a criminal record, like I said, can't get a job. That's what it's been about since 2007, delivered in different ways, different vehicles. But the core of, like, if someone said to me, what are you passionate about? It'll be about creating life-changing jobs for people with major barriers to work.
That's a pretty risky thing to do. I mean, the entrepreneur always launches first and then learns as they go, which is a bit scary because most people want a business plan, they want all of those other pieces, but you just launched into it because I'm like, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to do it. You're obviously quite determined, but also you didn't have a clue what you were doing, quote unquote, but you just launched into it and thought, I'm going to give it. How did your wife react to that? Because some gospel entrepreneurs, they're married, they kind of carry this thing, but that's a pretty critical relationship once you launch something like that.
Yeah, there's lots of parts to this story, but I think that the fact that we were in Kenya together was really important. The fact that we then at this social action conference together on that Saturday was really important. So I wasn't coming back to tell her about it. She was sitting next to me at the time. So I think those things have helped. And then also in terms of making decisions about our life as a married couple, this is pre-kids and we're both working, teacher, doctor, 2 salaries. We could go, whereas the world would tell you, stretch yourself, go and get the best house you can right now. We chose to live in a very multicultural, cheap part of Nottingham. That was the mission bit that had come back with us, was actually we could support ourselves. So we were living in a multicultural area with the aim of, if we get blessed with children, we'll live off 1 salary, we'll look after our own children. So that having made those decisions, I think that allows room for God to speak. I think sometimes people are saying, oh, I couldn't possibly do that, or what a brave step of faith. But really, the foundations were laid in those earlier decisions. We had the space to do it. So in some ways, it wasn't a risk at that moment because, like I said, male primary school teacher, if I try something, it doesn't work, then I can probably get another job. Let's be honest, I can go back. And with Sam earning as a doctor, she was earning more than me anyway. So in some ways, there was a free shot. Let's give it a go. We haven't got any children. If it doesn't work, we'll switch it around. But what if it is a God thing? Like, maybe I'm wrong. Absolutely. But how are we going to find out? Let's give it a go. And God's been really faithful.
I think that's a really important point because I often say to people, it's really good when you walk through a door to have a swing door. Sometimes you just walk through a door and there's no way back. And then you're like, we're going to build a big system or we're going to do this in a business. And you walk through the door, but there's no way back. And then you're committed. And if it doesn't work, you've got a problem. It's exactly the same in what you do. You had a swing door. Hey, if this doesn't happen, we can swing back, which I think often at the initial stages, people listening, entrepreneurial, possibly younger guys, you don't burn all your bridges. And that's timing as well, isn't it? When you make these moves, it's quite a critical factor.
Absolutely. And what you just described there is exactly the case. But we've also got experience of the other, as in 10 years later, the birth of Grace Enterprises, that involves Sam giving up medicine, coming off the list with the GMC, and us going absolutely all in and saying, God's in it. But you're quite right. Speaking to someone at the beginning of that journey, our experience was, let's take some steps that could be reversed if necessary. And yeah, I might feel sorry for myself and be thinking, how did I hear God wrong or whatever else? There's a quote by John Piper about risk is right. And to paraphrase it, it says something like, what if a risk, and if it went wrong, it would only bring shame and disadvantage only to yourself. But what if you got it right? What if taking that risk meant that things happened that otherwise wouldn't, that then have a real gospel impact? That might be a risk worth taking. And I'm absolutely a believer in that.
Yeah, and that's the gospel entrepreneur piece. And so what you did is you changed from being a teacher to being a cleaner. That was the first thing you did.
Well, but no, before that, I became a gardener. So not much more glamorous.
Okay.
So I had gone to the church straight after Kenya and said, how about we do this? And that was a no. Then 2007, I feel like God speaks to me. So I've handed in my notice to become an employer, as I've said, and then go to the church again to say, I'm really serious about this. I think God's just spoken directly to me. He's calling me to do this. So I'm going to. Shall we do it together? but actually it wasn't the right time for them. Loads of different reasons that could take up the rest of this podcast. But I was still convinced. It was confusing and it wasn't what I wanted at all, because I'd seen a church in Kenya doing amazing stuff. I never wanted to start my own thing, but actually seeing that was the situation, I was absolutely convinced God had called. So was tried to be faithful to that. Started a gardening business. Church was supportive of it, but it was definitely me running it, doing my own thing. Customers would have come from church, etc. But I did that for 10 years. So that was 2007 to 2017, but I had the same restlessness and frustrations of like how someone needs to do something about the single mum. Someone needs to do something about the former addict, because the gardening had grown into landscaping. And so I was only employing physically fit blokes, to be honest, but I was never called to be a gardener and I was never called to only employ those people. So I was always thinking, how could I do something different that could employ a wider range of people, have a bigger impact? How can I get out of, I'd become the bottleneck. So I started it, but now I was the problem. How could I do something simpler? If God is going to call this and really grow it, how can I take a step back? Along with, how can I do it with the church, which was always the passion all the way through.
Yeah, and I think that the entrepreneur goes to the church pastor, and you often think, oh, they're going to be full of faith. They're into taking risks. And sometimes it can be a real knockback because they just don't get it in the same way. And you almost need another critical friend that comes alongside you and says, now that might have been your wife, but someone as an entrepreneur that comes alongside and says, yeah, I'm with you on this. Let's go for it and try it. Because sometimes you go to the pastor thinking that the church is going to embrace this. This is what church is all about. But that knockback can be quite a challenge for the young entrepreneur, can't it?
It definitely can. And in all fairness, we all like have our own passions and are thinking that's the most important thing. Whereas the church leaders got so much on their plate and maybe right that this isn't the priority for them at that time. But then what happened next? I mean, because we are doing it with the church. So to fill in some of the blanks. So 2017, I felt like God spoke directionally again with a fresh vision for what is now Grace Enterprises. So I went to our church leader. Church leader had changed during that time. And also during that 10 years, food banks had grown. There'd been the credit crisis, like the economy had changed. I was obviously 10 years older, possibly a little bit wiser and more mature with a few rough edges knocked off. And instead of being, he's a teacher who's had a midlife crisis early, at least I was, well, I've got 10 years in the bank of having done something and made it work to some degree. And the church leader, Ben, was so faithful. He was a friend before he became the church leader. So we had loads of entrepreneurial conversations, and he's much more of that mindset. So actually, the way God moved things around and was working in me and in the church to make things happen, I'm not questioning his timing at all. While at the same time, it was really frustrating and confusing. But then 10 years later, the church say yes. And we now see it as this is one of the things that Grace Church Nottingham does, Grace Enterprises. How can we do more than just a food parcel, more than a night shelter, more than a soup run? If Jesus has promised life and life in all its fullness, and he has, then we have got to do more than that sticking plaster, the relief work. And so that's what we feel called to do it in a sustainable way, to provide jobs and employment so that we can practically live out our faith and say, yeah, we will give you a food parcel if you're hungry, but how about a job? And we'll support you on the way, because then you can have the hope and the dignity and the purpose that comes from working. And if you want to know why we have this joy, and if you want to know why I'm not teaching and why Sam's given up being a doctor, then let's have a conversation about God and about faith.
Matt, the critical thing is a lot of these people just getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning and turning up for a job. It's as practical as that, isn't it, for some of their lives, because they're so messy. And so you've got to put a structure. It's not like employing anyone else. It's a very different style of employment, isn't it, that you do with Grace Enterprises?
Yeah, and the tension is employing people who haven't got a job, have maybe never had a job, or that no one else has managed to successfully employ them. We're employing people who are hard to employ, but then genuinely believing that if you do it through business, it is sustainable and scalable. So that is a real tension to hold, because we employ some people, let's be honest, it'd be much, much easier to employ someone else, and it would probably be more profitable to employ someone else. And then we're saying things like, we believe you're valuable, so we're going to pay you the real living wage, not the bare minimum, which again sounds absolutely crazy. Or why don't you use work experience and volunteers is a question that comes our way. And I'd be saying, look, I'm not against that. For some people use that and that's fine. But I think the dignity that comes from working and earning and getting your own paycheck, I think that is some of what is transformational. But actually, also recognize that it's not as if just giving someone a job will solve all their problems. There's a reason why they were where they were, and a job isn't going to solve everything. And that's where the holistic support that we give is so crucial. That's the transformational bit. I mean, apart from the Holy Spirit. And that's where Sam and her medical background comes in. So actually being able to think, is there a physical health issue here? Or is it a mental health issue? Or trying to discern what could we do better? And she's well connected with all of the different agencies across the city. So actually we have people referring potential employees to us, but we can also refer our employees outwards to advice for like maybe debt advice or with English lessons, or there are so many different things. We absolutely are not saying we're experts and we're siloed and we're doing it on our own. We want to do stuff in partnership, in relationship with others. Just think that's far more gospel way of doing things.
And Matt, you're a bit frustrated because you're like, okay, we've done gardening, we've done a
Yeah.
bit of cleaning,
Yeah.
but we're still only employing a few people. And how do we scale this up? So you're still living this passion, you're still wanting to grow it. So you're kind of living with the tension of that, which entrepreneurs do, because upscaling what they do is a real critical factor. But the
Yeah.
steps to upscale can sometimes be a challenge.
Yes. And so, yeah, that was it. You're quite right. Radiant Cleaners was the first business we started for Grace Enterprises. So immediately on day one, it's a more diverse workforce, employing men, employing women, old, young. Been doing that now for over 7 years. So that was business one. But when God had spoken to me in 2017 with what I would say, this is the God-given vision for Grace Enterprises, it was really, really clear that we're going to do 7 different businesses. So, which to me is exciting. I probably left that a bit out for some of the people who I was trying to convince early doors, because this is like going to push them over the edge. But here I'm like, so I'm living with this now of like, we're going to run 7 different businesses of different shapes and sizes that are going to create different jobs for different people. Even if we could run the biggest cleaning company in the world, which I'm not saying we could, but even if we could, we wouldn't do that. We would want to employ different people. And so, yeah, that's exactly why we started a couple of years ago now, our second business, Jubilee Events. And when people were guessing what will the second business be, they were thinking, well, you're running a cleaning business. Maybe it'll be window cleaning. Maybe it'll be carpet cleaning, something tangential and next to it. But actually we're like, no, we're going to start a marquee hire business, which caught people on the hop. And they were saying, what's the link between a cleaning business and a marquee business? I was saying there isn't one, apart from they're both about creating life-changing jobs, treating people well, employing people with major barriers, paying them the real living wage, and doing things properly. And then again, last year, we got the joy of starting our third social enterprise business. And again, people are like, well, what comes next? If you go back, gardening, cleaning, marquees, and then we started a biscuit business, which again surprised people because everything else was a service. So like, do you know how to run a product business? Which of course the answer is no. But actually believing that we can, because why can't we? If God's calling us into this, and if God brings the right people along with the right skills and the right capacity, the right resources to be able to do it, then why can't we? And that has been our attitude. Can it create different jobs for different people? And it absolutely does. You can imagine the kind of person who cleans every day in an office somewhere is different to the kind of
Yep.
guy who might be in a marquee team putting that up in the
Yeah.
wind and rain, who are different to being someone who's baking day in, day out as part of a team. And that's why we do it. Different jobs for different people.
But also you've partnered. So it's not the Matt Grace Enterprises. You partner with people to deliver what you want to do. And I think people listening to this, they need to understand if you're an entrepreneur, you can learn a lot from others, but it's also who could you partner with to enable your dream to become a reality? And there's a sense in which you need to do that as the entrepreneur, isn't there?
There definitely is. And I think maybe in the gardening business, by then I'm like, I'm on my own. I'm doing my own thing. I'm trying to make myself accountable. But let's be honest, I could do whatever I want. And then that works to some degree. People were asking, do you really want to? What I do now is run a charity. So therefore, I am employed by 6 trustees. So they're the ones that are responsible. They could give me my notice tomorrow if they wanted to. And actually submitting myself to them is like, oh, that's going to slow you down, which it does. It's going to stop you from doing these things, which it does. But I don't think there's anything yet where I now look back on it and gone, oh, if only we'd done it quicker, that would have worked more. I don't think that. And there are definitely things where I think I would have just got on and done it, and that would have gone pretty wrong. So actually getting a group of people around you, whether that's a prayer group, which I've got as well, really blessed with that, or whether it's trustees who are actually helping to shoulder that burden for those strategic decisions and the bigger picture stuff, that is such a joy. I mean, they could find a fridge magnet somewhere that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, that kind of thing. And I really do believe that actually, like as an entrepreneur, I naturally want to go on my own. I naturally want to back myself and want to do it yesterday. But actually having some other people who are asking those difficult questions that I don't want to be asked, to be honest, it doesn't actually do me any harm having to figure out some answers before we press the go button. But there'll always be an entrepreneurial edge to it. I mean, let's be honest, I feel slowed down by them at times, and they definitely feel sped up by me. So it's a compromise.
And you don't want a group full of entrepreneurs because that also won't work. You need people that are going to be different to you in those teams and what you develop, which is part of the success of what Grace Enterprises. I know you've got a long way to go, but for me, being with you, just visiting, it's the changed lives that have resulted in this. And I remember one guy saying, I can't believe I'm paying tax. I'm a real human being. You know, there's an excitement there, but also they come to faith. That's not a prerequisite because you work with anyone. But as they see this worked out, it's just been a great model that I think could be replicated in other spaces and places, Matt, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, I do believe that is possible, and that's what God will do with it potentially. So yeah, we're physically in the church building is where our offices are. So being able to meet with people who, I mean, it doesn't look like a church compared to, so we're already challenging people's preconceptions who are coming along for an interview. And I've had people sit there and say to me, I don't believe in all this mumbo jumbo faith stuff. If you're telling me I've got to believe it to have this job, you can stick this job and you can fill in a few expletives. And then actually, but I say, no, it isn't like that. You don't have to believe that. And if I knew now you would never, ever come to believe the same thing I do, then I'll still give you the job. You can have the job. Like, we want to help you to fulfill your goals, but we're still going to be praying for you. And if you ever want to ask me the question of why am I not teaching, or why has Sam given up medicine? Why do you do what you do? Because you could definitely do something easier. I'd be like, yeah, I know. But actually, why do you do what you do? Then we have those conversations. And it has been a joy. As you say, it's certainly not a prerequisite. But when you have seen people come to church for a food parcel and then stay for community and then come to find Jesus and then get a job and then seeing their lives transformed, and then also should just say, that's the linear version. Take all of that, jumble it all up. And we obviously see that as well. Then it's a real joy to just be part of that process. We're not saying we are going to bring revival to Nottingham by giving people jobs. But I would also say, is it possible that God might bring some level of revival to Nottingham by reaching out to people throughout the whole working week and walking with them and doing life with them? Then maybe we're certainly prepared to give it a go.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about what you do. There is a gospel imperative through everything you do that runs in the way you treat people, the way you pay people with the enterprises you do. I'm excited. We're coming into land now, Matt. I'm excited about what the other 4 will be. But also, I think for me, it's business as ministry, it's the entrepreneurial gift. Often people say to me, you're just in it to make money. There is another way that you can use this gift that is a real gospel imperative, which is what you do. Because other people would say, well, all the hassle, all the stress, but I get the added value because I get the benefit of the money, quote unquote, the profit. Whereas that all goes into the ministry, doesn't it?
Yes. So, I mean, firstly, I don't want to say as if I'm not paid and doing it voluntarily.
Oh, no.
And so
No.
Sam. But yeah, But you are absolutely right. I own 0% of anything and everything I've ever started. And there are people who look at me at that point and think you're absolutely mad, and I'm not criticizing them and the way that they would do things. And there are some fantastic Christian business people who'll be making lots of money, giving loads of money to Christian ministries all around the world. And that's amazing. And we definitely need Christians in that space. But I think for us, it's been a real sense of when we are asking people to come with us on this journey, to back us to do the next thing, would you seed fund the next business? The fact that I've got a vested interest in it, as in my heart is fully there, but not a vested interest in a financial point of view. It's like, if this works, then it will replicate and scale and we'll see lives transformed across the country, rather than if it works, I'll move to a nicer house and have a nice car. And even then people would say, oh, that's all right because you have worked hard. That isn't what motivates me. I don't lack for much. And so actually it's brilliant to be able to say, do you know what? I'm just not in it for those reasons. I want to see God's name glorified. And if we can do a bit through business that could actually pioneer something, then I'd love to be part of that. And then what God does with it through the next person or in the next country or in the next city, if we can play a part of that, fantastic. And if it's others doing it, then we'll be cheering them on.
Great. Matt, it's been amazing, as always, to have a conversation with you. You're inspiring. What you're doing is fantastic. And just the partnership has been great. Thanks so much for doing this podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's always been fun. And yeah, looking forward to seeing if we can do something together at some point.
Yeah, amen. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, then do please leave a comment. This podcast has been put together in partnership with UCB and Gospel Entrepreneurs Revelation Trust. So until the next time, thanks so much. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future. God bless you.